Hello, I'm Lisa Bell, and welcome to another episode of Florida Foodie. And today I am joined by a special co-host, News 6 reporter Clay Lepard. And together we are with Chad Truxell, who is the executive director of the Marine Discovery Center, who is here today to talk about single-use plastics, which are now everywhere. And specifically, we're talking about kind of plastic food containers and plastic straws. And so we want to thank you so much for being here, because this is such an important issue, especially for people living in Florida. Sure. First, though, I do want to talk about a little bit of breaking news, because all around the world, corporations and local governments, big governments, have been working to try and limit plastic straws. And recently, the Florida legislature voted to ban those bans. In other words, they did not want local communities or local cities and towns or counties banning plastic straws. And in somewhat of a surprise move, some would say, Florida's new governor, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis, issued his first veto on that piece of legislation. Was that a surprise to you?
Yeah, it was a surprise. Obviously, being his first veto, we didn't know where we would see it. When we've seen this before when plastic bags, we had the same type of a thing where, the politics get involved, and unfortunately there became a delay on any legislation statewide for the plastic bags, and then lots of movement to stop cities from governing their own, plastic use. So it was a surprise, but also, we're excited because it does set a tone, statewide now on how we need to move forward with the single-use plastic issue.
Yeah, in fact, the governor saying, when he vetoed it, saying these measures have not, as far as I can tell, frustrated any state policy or harmed the state's interests. In fact, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection has encouraged Florida residents, schools, and businesses to reduce plastic straw use. It's pretty remarkable, though, when you see a Republican governor going against a Republican state legislature in something like this.
Yeah, I agree. I've been very impressed so far with Governor DeSantis's moves so far in his policy on the environment, and this was another step in that direction of saying, I don't see any issues, where it's going to create further challenges for our state. And if anything, we already have a DEP that has stated, like you said, and again, the same thing with plastic bags. They recognize already at their staff level that there is an issue with single-use plastics, so why wouldn't the policy follow?
So I do want to just bring in Clay real quick, because let's talk about plastic straws. I know, Clay, you recently did a story on New Smyrna Beach trying to ban some of this. Tell us about that. I was
about to say, this was something that, you and I dealt with a month ago. The last time I saw you, you were standing on top of the ladder, the jack of all trades over at the Marine Discovery Center, where it stands right now with New Smyrna Beach. For those who don't know, Chad, could you just let us know? Because this has been something you guys have been very passionate about. Yeah,
so, again, being a coastal community, we're a small community, but, we're also a destination. And so we realize the impact of that destination. And if you're a user of the resource, single-use plastics tend to be what's left behind. And so we've been working, from several different levels. One is through our visitor bureau. I'm on the board of our visitor bureau, and we wanted to, what can our visitor bureau do to get this word out? So they've been, doing some ambassador programs, champions of tourism, and really focusing on single-use plastics, both internally and then to the broad public, as well as the chamber. So at the chamber level, I'm also on the board of our chamber. And again, this is strategic. Like, how do we get everyone involved? So at the chamber level, again, how do we get businesses to proactively say, I can see, that people are very dedicated to cause. And so they're going to want to do the right thing if my business is doing it. They're going to maybe patronize my business more as a result of things I'm doing. And then finally, at the city level, 3 years ago on Earth Day, we said, well, I know you don't want to do a ban because of where we are, and especially where our commissioners were. I reached out to each of them and, singly, and you can tell they were hesitant. So how about just recognizing the issue of single-use plastic bags? And then from there, we make a resolution, and so they passed that. And I think that was back in 2015, I believe, is when that, I don't have my dates with me, but so we passed that resolution, and that followed up with another resolution on straws. Again, it doesn't have any teeth to it. It is just recognizing the issue, And so now we want to take it that one step further, what
Which
can we
is
do?
talking about city property. Now, that's this latest resolution is really when it comes to businesses that work with cities, city vendors, and then also on city property. So we're talking food festivals. I think when I was up there, it was one of the food festivals that weekend at New Smyrna Beach. First off, were you surprised, though, just going back to the governor just a little bit,
Sure.
To see that legislation first come up, as you guys are at the same time bringing up the counter legislation locally?
Yeah, and initially, if you read it, the evolution of that is that it did start as a reduction, right? I mean, the whole ordinance and policy change was really to how do we reduce single-use plastics and straws specifically in our state, and then that got reworded to come up with the ban on bans. I've seen it before. I wouldn't, when politics are involved, everyone has their interest, and so, but what is the right thing to do? And I think the governor recognized that.
So, plastic straws have been around for decades. So why do you think there is this fairly new movement to try and reduce plastic straw use? I mean, it's only been within the past few years that we've actually seen major corporations like Disney and SeaWorld and Starbucks and McDonald's and entire countries and now states and even local communities really raising awareness about this. What changed?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the viral video with the turtle and the straw, being pulled out with a pair of pliers, that was heart-wrenching for all of us, and because it did go viral, a lot of people became aware. As we all know at this table, and most people, probably realize, plastic straws is a very tiny, amount of single-use plastics, right? I mean, roughly 40% of all plastics, that are consumed every year by us are single-use. That's a huge amount of plastics, every year that we use one time and we discard. Straws are a fraction of a percent, right?
Right.
So the idea of straws is, I think it's what landed and resonated with people like, oh, I had no idea. And they just didn't realize it, even though as much in our world we preach it, we talk about it all the time with all types of plastic. So there's something about that connection between an animal being hurt, a sea turtle, of course, everyone loves sea turtles. It was gut-wrenching for a lot of people, and so that was the easy one. And we can go to restaurants, and we do, and we've been very successful, and say, at a minimum, just straws only upon request, right? Don't auto straw. So that's a very simple concept that you can actually save money as a restaurant by adopting your own internal policies of just working with your servers to not just auto straw. That in and of itself can help save money as well as save, potential single-use plastics.
Or offering a cardboard box versus a styrofoam or plastic container.
Yep.
But what is some of the resistance? I mean, some people have said that these straw bans are just symbolic, which is what you just pointed out,
Sure.
because they do represent such a small fraction of the overall plastics on this planet.
So what we've seen, because again, we've been working on this issue for 5 years or so now, is the movement, right? This wave of interest now. So yes, a straw is just a start, but it gets the conversation started. I'm here, speaking to you all. You all are doing a story on this as a result of this wave of information that's now getting out there and awareness. So that's what it does for us. And then policy is not always the best way to go to get something done. So it has to be a community level solution, and that takes everyone. So from the consumer approach to the business end, to the policy, all of us are responsible. And so we all have an angle on this. And so to me, this is a start. If we have some type of policy with the straw, I think we're going to get a lot more movement with businesses to want to do the right thing.
What's the one-use plastic you want to see touched on next? If it's not straws, are we talking beer can holders? Are we talking just plastic forks? What are we looking at?
Yeah, it's so bags, bottles, and straws are the really easy ones that we all can probably quickly make change on, right? I brought my own water bottle. You have a coffee mug, a real ceramic coffee mug here today. Those are things, I saw, here walking through, through the office here, that you all have a water bottle filling station. So there are very simple things that we can do with those 3 items that I'd recommend right now. Those are the low-hanging fruit, if you will, of plastics. And then it's just, what that does is then it makes us more aware of our consumption. And so as we become more aware of our consumption, just an example, my wife, when our daughter was, she's 15 now, but when she was 3 and 4 and going to preschool and then elementary school, instead of Lunchables, which of course every kid had, and there's so much waste with that, she called them Bella bowls, right? So her name is Bella. So she wanted to make it really, cool for her, and that way she can tell her friends, well, this is a Bella bowl. You don't have this. This is really cool. And everything was reusable, right? Plus it was healthy as well. And so she understood that connection, to food at a young age, which is important. And she also understood, her dad and what he does for a living and how that's really important. So
it's amazing how really in the past 50 years we have become such a wasteful society. I mean, I remember growing up, before you really bought bottled water in a vending machine, it was all soda back then. Yeah. And a lot of times it was glass bottles or cans. And so to see kind of this evolution over the past 30, 40, 50 years where there's just plastic everywhere is kind of crazy. But I think, it does come down to the individual consumer and really being mindful of that. And I'm sure you're seeing a lot of that in your work. Just going to the grocery store and you have a choice between orange juice in a plastic container or in a cardboard container. And so do you think about that, like when you go to the grocery store?
Oh, gosh. Way too much.
For those who don't know, I mean, outside the Marine Discovery Center is this massive lionfish sculpture that you guys had made that is made and correct me if I'm wrong, is made entirely just of stuff you guys have picked up.
Yeah, that is correct. So we worked with the Artists Workshop, who is a nonprofit that's right next to us, to work on how do we take art and really, get this message out about plastics and also about lionfish, which is a major invasive species of our marine ecosystems. So we're really proud of that sculpture of a lionfish and the awes that we get when people walk up. So it's made out from plastic. Milk jugs and orange juice containers, bottle caps, toys, discarded kites, things like that. So all just stuff that would have been in landfill.
So we talked about the big news at the top, the breaking news, Governor Ron DeSantis vetoing the ban on straw bans. But let's talk about the Marine Discovery Center. You've been there for 15 years now. Where are you located? What sort of work do you guys do? Because a lot of people might not be familiar with what exactly you do.
Yeah, sure. We're in New Smyrna Beach. Our mission is to protect and restore Florida's coastal ecosystems through education, research, and community stewardship. So we're right on the Indian River Lagoon. We have a 22-acre site. We lease from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And so our role as a nonprofit is to make sure that the community is aware of how unique this ecosystem is. The Indian River Lagoon is the most biologically diverse estuary in North America. It's, pretty amazing, from the big animals, from sea turtles to dolphins to manatees to the really small, stuff that we can find. So our role is to make people aware of that, and we do that through things like Shuck and Share. Shuck and Share is an oyster shell recycling program where 15 local restaurants give up their oyster shells to us, and then we work with partners to put those oyster shells back into the water to restore oyster reefs. So now we're stopping that waste stream, and then we're actually growing new oysters. New oysters, one oyster can filter anywhere from 20 to 50 gallons of water in a 24-hour period. So oyster shell, restoration is a big deal. Lots and lots of educational programs. From kids, we have a program called Sea Squirts, which is a parent-toddler program. We're teaching kids at a young age, everything from plastics to sea turtles to manatees to lionfish. I mean, just, all the cool things that we have here in Florida that we kind of take for granted. We want them to be stewards at a young age.
What's the biggest change that you have observed in the Indian River Lagoon over the past 15 years?
There's no doubt that algae blooms and water quality, and I know Governor DeSantis as well. It's something I've been very proud of, some of the action that he's taken. What we tend to forget, we look at it from a big picture level. We go over the bridge, we see the pretty, water in the ocean, but we're there every day and we see those changes every day. And so back in 2011, we had what we call our super bloom, massive algal bloom that occurred throughout the Indian River Lagoon, killed off 57,000 acres of seagrass, and it had a cascading impact on that particular system. 2012 brought in this brown tide. We had never really seen it. It had always been in the system, but never blooming. And then, since that time in 2012, these brown tides keep persisting. And so it's such a small micro algae that it just suffocates everything. And it really, it's what we call an ecosystem disruptive algae. It's not a harmful algal bloom to humans, but the impacts are definitely felt by us because, we can't eat things that come out of that water during that time, and it looks terrible, fish die. So now, we've gone through all this. We're still going through these waves of change with these brown tides and other algal blooms, but people get it. Now they're starting to see, wow, I'm directly connected from a tourism, when we saw Lake Okeechobee discharges and on all the issues in the St. Lucie estuary, as well as the West Coast, Caloosahatchee. People get that if we don't have a healthy environment, our economy is directly linked to that.
Is that frustrating, though, for you that it has to get that bad before, people really kind of pay attention or realize, that they, too, are affected by that?
Yeah, I'm definitely, you can ask my wife, I'm a pretty, optimistic person, but at the same time, I'm a realist, right? And I've, just over the years, been more pragmatic in understanding what it takes for change to occur. And so, I know that education, but I can talk to people all in our own area, in our own little world, and I might talk to them now, and they've been through a program with us, and it didn't resonate with them, that behavior change. So I think it's unfortunate, but I think it is a human condition of reaction sometimes, and just, because we're all so focused on what we need to do to live our own lives, until you make it affect you personally in your personal life, the change doesn't usually, come. So yeah, it can be a little challenging.
And I think a lot of people especially the New Smyrna Beach area, have that same mentality where you are a part of the environment that you're living in. How important is that for you to see New Smyrna Beach go forward with the first steps on this ban, as opposed to a place that's more, centrally located and maybe doesn't have that direct environmental impact they see day to day?
Yeah, that's always been, my thing. And when I speak to different, policymakers in our city, and even in our county level, is, hey, we're a coastal town. This is what, we love about it. It's why we live here. It's why people come here. And we need to set the bar. We need to set the example, not wait. So I think it's critical that we be those leaders and show other communities that this is important to us. Water quality is important to us. The issue with single-use plastics polluting our environment is important to us, and we recognize how valuable this environmental asset is, and we need to protect it.
It's washing up on your shores. You guys are the ones who are seeing what others are doing and ending up right there on your beach, in the lagoons, and unfortunately, with the wildlife.
Absolutely,
the area.
Yeah. From sea turtles to birds. I just got a text this morning about, another couple of birds wrapped up in monofilament. One was still alive and one had died. And, monofilament is a, plastic, derivative. And I fish, and I use it. But again, it's just constantly making people aware of how we can do better, with our environment.
Can you pinpoint the biggest threat? Is it plastic, single-use plastic, or is it, fertilizers that we're putting on our lawns?
Yeah, there's a lot, right? There is no one. No, you can't pinpoint it to answer your question. Most of us will kind of look at stormwater in general, and from fertilizer to septic and sewer, because we do treat the sewer, but then we put it out into the system, so it still has some nutrients in there. To plastics, to petrochemicals and so forth. These are all things that we're doing, and it's just being aware of how our daily lives, just because it's gone from our lives doesn't mean it's gone from the natural world. And in that connection, like our role, we call it hands-on, feet wet. We want people to be connected beyond just let's have a talk. We want you to experience through citizen science and getting your hands on and feet wet. And we think that immersive type of programming can change that behavior to where they feel like they're connected. And to your point, yes, it's our beach too, and we don't want to see it polluted.
I know Clay's story. You were talking about how the city of New Smyrna Beach basically had a Facebook poll to see if people were on board with this plastic straw ban and the single-use plastic modifications, bans. And when I checked last night, more than 3,400 people had voted, and 79% of the respondents were in support of the ban. So do you think that something like that is going to happen soon in New Smyrna Beach?
I do. I think the timing is right. And, I think we have, to figure out that policy and how that would work. But, if we look at internal first, the city legislating it at their own events, and anyone who does programming and projects on their events, I think we can make that happen. And change is not easy. Policy change is not easy.
And they admitted this is very much a baby step in all of this. This does not affect your private businesses on the shoreline at this point. Obviously, it puts a little bit of pressure being like, hey, everyone else is doing this. One of the big questions I like to ask, and my wife and I have had this discussion a lot, Chad, what is your preference alternative when it comes to straws? Because there are a lot of different options out there, and my wife will be the first.
Use one. I don't know why people feel the need to use a straw.
I mean,
I drink from my coffee cup right now.
I mean,
you know?
My wife uses the argument of something with orange juice. If you can use a straw, then you're not getting the orange juice on your teeth, so it's less likely to stain your teeth. That is her argument. I'm standing on behalf of her. Now, we are, our household is now a metal straw household.
Which are great gifts, by the way, for birthdays, Christmas.
They are, and I enjoy it for a cold drink. It just makes it that little bit colder. But I was curious where you stood on it, or if you are just a strawless person. Can you tolerate the bamboo straws, the wood straws?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very easy when it comes to, I'm not very picky from food to, to how I eat it. I mean, well, I guess I'm picky with beer. I do like my beer in a glass container. I will say that. But with that said, the paper straws are fine. As far as environmentally, there's a couple of products that seem to hold up better than others. There's some that they're gluten free. So really looking at the whole entire issue of what is the best alternative. I think some of the paper products, if it's going to be a single use, are perfectly fine. I've seen some of the straw types of like pine straw types of straws, and those kind of break down. I've seen pasta noodles, and they can be a bit of a challenge.
Are there ones that are better than others environmentally? I mean, it goes back to the argument of like, is getting a metal straw saving that much plastic, given that what goes into into it is.
Yeah. So if we're just talking about plastics, right? Anything that's not plastic, and bioplastic would be considered a plastic, even though it's not made from a petroleum, it's made from a plant product. It's still a plastic. It creates a polymer. That polymer can't break down. It's going to persist in our environment. So I look at anything that can be reused as a great solution. Sure, if we're looking at the entire life cycle of that product, we can get really deep into the carbon footprint and so forth. But ultimately, in this case, I think we have to be careful, because we can get lost in the weeds on all this, and we'll never get anything done. Yeah. Ultimately, I look at this as if we need to reduce single-use plastics.
Is it better, though, stay from a standpoint that someone switches out their single-use plastics to metal plastics, and eventually, over time, being used over and over again, those, they can get a little grody. I don't know if that's the correct term for that.
No, there are brushes. There are straw brushes that you can use to clean them and boil them if you'd like.
But from that standpoint, is it better to have that metal straw in our waste streamline as opposed to, or those bamboo straws in our waste streamline, as opposed to the plastic? Because as you said, the plastic doesn't break down, but does the metal, is the metal any better?
Yeah, good question. So the idea is we think of sustainability, and that is something that can persist and be used over and over again, or can be repurposed or recycled. And in this case, a metal straw can absolutely be recycled. So if we can come up with a product that can be recycled, it can be reused, that's what we want. Plastics are great. We all know their versatility and so forth, but they're not getting recycled. I mean, less than 10%. So it's not working. We got to come up with a different alternative.
The idea is for you to pass down your metal straws to your great-great-great-grandchildren so they will be used for 300 years.
Lisa, where do you stand on the straw
Well,
situation?
I received metal straws for Christmas, and it was my favorite Christmas gift. It was from my husband, because I'm very much, also my New Year's resolution was to go and pick plastic out of local waterways at least once a month. I have 2 little kids, so we tried to do once a month. And it is very disturbing to see what you find, even in lakes all around Central Florida. I mean, crazy things. Golf balls, little Nerf bullets from Nerf guns, of course, plastic
those end up
bags,
everywhere.
Yeah, bottles.
Yeah, they do.
On Easter, though, we were over at New Smyrna Beach, and we made that our Easter morning, basically walk along the beach. We had our own little Easter egg hunt out there, and it was looking for plastic. And I was both pleasantly surprised and very disturbed. I was pleasantly surprised at how little plastic we found, because we did not find the big bottles and kind of some of the bigger pieces of plastic that I tend to find in lakes here in Orlando. But I did find a ton of microplastics. And at first, and I think that this happens to a lot of people when you're out at the beach, you don't even realize how much is out there, because it's really hard to see. And after being out there for maybe about 20 minutes, I couldn't walk a step without seeing it, and you kind of have to train your eye. I started looking for little pieces of blue or green or purple or red. There were so many little white pieces, I didn't know if it was kind of a piece of shell or rock or something, or plastic, couldn't tell. But once you started seeing these tiny little pieces of plastic all over New Smyrna Beach. And so it was a little disturbing to me, and I'm sure you see that as well.
Yeah, and that's exactly. So when we get on the beach, it's hard because, like you said, sometimes it just looks like this pristine beach. And we have, lots of beach, in Volusia County, lots of sand, lots of places to enjoy, and you don't see it. It's not like you said in a lake or this mega concentration of plastics. When you do see it is when we get a lot of the seaweed washed up, right? Because the seaweed is out there, floating and drifting, and then it washes up, and what is it carrying with it? Everything else that's floating and drifting. And remember, you're only seeing the plastic that floats. Not all plastic floats, right? A lot of it is suspended or even sinks, and so. But to your point, you start getting trained. Microplastics are generally defined as anything smaller than 5 millimeters in size. But we're seeing
what is that?
all
what
kinds.
Is 5 millimeters in size?
It's tiny, almost to where you need a microscope to see it. So it's pretty tiny. I mean, you could see it with with your eyes, but it's pretty tiny. So what you're actually seeing is still what we would call a regular, plastic that's just broken down over time.
It's like the size of a fingernail, but it's just small enough that these tiny little sea creatures are consuming this. And I'm sure every time you've seen a necropsy, you basically find plastic inside their stomachs.
It's becoming more and more, common. We don't do a lot of the turtles, but we've done necropsies on bottlenose dolphins, things like that. And whether it's on the outside and you see, an issue with plastics on the animals, or whether it's internal, consumption. Yeah, everything, including us, as we all know, have consumed plastics, whether we mean to or not. It's just, it's everywhere in our lives, and we are eating it and consuming it, and it does have, the best that we can tell, I think, the studies are going on now. We need to do long-term studies when it comes to humans as to the impact. But I do think that, we're going to look back in 10 years and go, wow, we all have, BPA in our bodies, which is a chemical that we try not to use in a lot of our plastics, but it does leach, into our water bottles and things like that.
And from what I understand, no matter how far deep researchers go in the ocean, to some of the deepest parts of the ocean that they're able to reach, they still find plastic on the bottom of the ocean.
Right. All over. So it's throughout the water column, throughout all the surfaces of the ocean, the most remote islands, the Maldives, you're going to find plastics. And so to think about, just these areas who, they don't have, lots of concentrations of people, our impact, in our very, busy areas are going into that ocean, eventually, winding up on some of these beautiful, remote beaches. So, yeah, it's just, and you guys asked me the question earlier about, when you go shopping, is it hard for you? And it is, because everywhere you look, and the more that we become aware of it. So I'm very, again, pragmatic though too in my approach, and do the best that I can. My daughter's very active in sports, and that becomes a challenge because all the sport teams have the single-use Gatorade bottles everywhere, and we go to these big tournaments, and then when we leave, just a row of filth of plastic primarily is left behind. And I know that there's no recycling that happens.
And it seems like it's getting harder when you're at the grocery store. I buy a lot of eggs, but to find eggs in a carton that's maybe made out of like a paper product versus plastic or styrofoam is becoming harder and harder.
Yeah. Yeah, and not only is it, so what to your point, I think, we have to drive some of that change in our consumption, right, in our, what we're purchasing. And so I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing my best to try that. But we're starting to see industry also come up with some pretty ingenious products. I think Igloo, not too long ago released, a cooler that's made from a paper product, right? Because they know that their products potentially have issues. We see lots of upcycling of plastics into clothing, but then of course there's a challenge with that, because when we launder the clothing, it potentially gets into our stream. So there's no great solutions, but I love the innovation, right? We are a smart creature that's constantly, coming up with innovative solutions to our challenges, right? And so I do think that that's also where this is going to have to come from. But I don't think recycling is the answer. It hasn't happened yet. And how long have we been trying?
It's always, I have friends who work in the food service industry, and one of the things is, they switch to obviously the cardboard takeout boxes, and you get those in the big shipments. And what are they wrapped in when they arrive to you?
Right.
They're wrapped in the plastic. So it's like even as you try to do more and more, you're still fighting that battle of like, guys, come on, why'd you
It's amazing the amount of packaging that products are in. You know, whether it's a child's toy, it takes basically the jaws of life to free it from its package. It's
so
insane,
true.
you know? And everything you buy it seems to be wrapped over and over and over again. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, there obviously shipping and, you know, damage, you know, is one. Merchandising is another one, right? I mean, for Mother's Day, you know, I had these beautiful orchids that I got purchased for my mom and for my mother-in-law, but they have and you first look at it and it's clear and it's colored, and then I go to press on the outside container, which is marketed very well, merchandised very well, and it's plastic, and it's just constantly around. So I just think that we don't think much about it, right? So until we drive that change, we
as consumers,
consumers, we're going to have to make smarter choices, and we're starting to see that. I can't recall the name of the store, but there's a store up in northern Volusia County that just opened up, and I think that they're focused on that bulk types of purchasing, for the customer. And so we don't have that. You guys, I'm sure, have some of those stores here in Orlando, but on our side, we don't have it. So. I mean, I'd love to see Publix, for example, change. That's a hard one, and that would be phenomenal if we could see them make that change.
That would cause quite the wave in Florida if that were to go through.
Absolutely.
One of the things we've been talking a lot about, just how slowing down the consumption of plastics. Are we at the point where the plastics that are out there right now, the plastics that you're finding washing up the beach at the bottom of the ocean, is that a lost cause at this point?
Yeah, we had some of the researchers from 5 gyres with us last year, and they go all around the global ocean, gyres, and do the research and the trawls and so forth. And all the stuff that's below the surface, there's really not much we can do. I think our focus really needs to be on what can we do to stop increasing the amount that's going in there right now. And you hear lots of different innovative solutions on how we're going to clean up some of it. And so there's some merit to some of these, and I think again it brings out some creative ideas and it brings the awareness, but overall, I think we should focus on the production, right? The source of that pollution. Stop that, and then we could work on what can we do with what's in there. Yeah.
So you were telling us briefly about some new efforts to try and clean up our environment, and something called One Planet Living. What is that?
Yeah, so One Planet Living is the idea that right now Americans live as if there's 5 planets, and that's from a perspective of just overall consumption, right? And so we're all consumers, and we're very fortunate that we benefit from the consumption that we have in this country, but we're also very wasteful. And so I believe Europe is around 3 planets that they live in. So the goal is to get to 1 planet. So it looks at several of these criteria that we try to look at as a framework. Plastic reduction is one of them. Water quality is one of them. Renewable energy is another one. Just water use and consumption. And so it's just looking at, a basic sustainability model. And so but it's really aimed a lot, right now we're using in the tourism. I mean, we're a huge tourism destination, from Orlando to our beach here in New Smyrna Beach. And the idea is, how do we make sure that when tourists come here, that they know that the people who are already living here really care about this? And if that's the case, then they're going to care as well.
It's got to help when places like Disney and SeaWorld, ban straws, and you notice it when you go to the theme park. You notice that there is a limit. You can't get a plastic bag at SeaWorld, for example.
Yeah. I mean, and it just makes, again, we've come a long way. So I know, the original question, like, well, why just straws? Because now that awareness is really coming out. We're seeing industry starting to change and modify some of their behaviors. And then the consumer is like, yeah, I guess I didn't really need that. And oh, wow, you have a paper to go container? Like, oh, that's cool. And so we're seeing that change happen.
We talked about how plastic straws were such a microcosm of a bigger problem. Expanding it out a little bit, just to food service. How much is food service a part of this problem as opposed to just manufacturing plastics?
Yeah, I mean, I think overall, the packaging is probably our biggest amount of single-use plastics that just, we talk about that 40% of overall annual production of plastic. From the merchandising and the packaging and shipping, that's where a lot of our plastics is. But where does the consumer see it? Those are things that they might see it, but they don't think about it. But I think at the restaurant level, at that, initial consumption level, there's some really, again, low-hanging fruits, and so that's kind of why we start there very often. And if we can challenge our restaurants, and many of them are all about it, to, hey, just don't auto straw. Here's an alternative, and we try to give them these best management, ideas. And
So what happens to you when you're at a diner having breakfast on a Saturday morning and server comes by and immediately throws down, a bunch of plastic straws?
Yeah, so, and it just depends on who I'm with, because my wife has just heard it so many times. I'm, if they're straws that are packaged and are just thrown down, I say, oh, we won't need these, but thank you for the offer, we appreciate it. And I said, and then I'll try to engage in a conversation, and it just depends on how busy they are, because if they're real busy, then I know that that's a lost cause, right? But I was at a restaurant, locally, New Smyrna Beach the other day, and he, went to give me a straw, the server, and I said, oh no, I don't want a straw. I said, aren't you guys part, because we have a program that we try to monitor which restaurants are doing what, and he said, oh yeah, actually, yeah, we are. He's like, we tried the paper straw, but our clients didn't really. And I said, oh, okay, that's really good to know. I said, I appreciate you telling me that. And I was like, I'd love to talk to you guys more, at another time when you're not so busy, about some other products that we can probably use. And he was all about it. He was like, actually, I've been studying this and kind of interested in it. And I said, yeah, the biggest thing that you guys could do is just stop auto strawing. Just stop automatically giving those straws. That's a simple thing, and then we can go from there. So yeah, I like to engage in the conversation if the timing is right,
I love that, auto strawing.
Auto strawing, indeed. Well, you talk about it. You notice the plastics when it's something like, you're opening a toy and that plastic does not open no matter how much you're trying to use the scissors on it and you're trying to rip it open. But you don't notice it from the other standpoints, and it can be little things like even just registering for a wedding, when you get wedding gifts in the mail and you find that it's in 3 different layers of plastic so that it doesn't break upon the shipping.
I think that is true. Just being mindful, because using a plastic fork and then throwing that in the trash, and we can reuse that. You can wash that and reuse it again, but people don't. Do you feel like you are making a difference, though, with the new generation, just the increased awareness, younger kids being mindful of the plastic that they're using?
Yeah, there's, we all know that our new generations that are coming up, that are these, major consumers, to be, are very, purpose driven, right? And so they're looking at things, and they realize that their purchase has an impact, and they want it to be a positive impact. And so that's pretty powerful, even though the consumption, level has increased of all these single-use plastics, because industry is putting it out there and we're buying it. I think that they're much more aware. So again, I do think that can drive the change. It's hard for me sometimes, because again, we're in our own little world. So all of us, at our center, and all of our staff and our volunteers, we all kind of challenge each other all the time. We have things like where, if you use plastic, we'll put $1, like a swear jar kind of thing. We'll do things like that.
That's good. I like that.
It's a glass jar, though, just to be clear. It's not a plastic jar.
Yeah, it's a glass jar. So, so we do things like that constantly to just kind of, keep that awareness. But then we're reminded, on the outside, when I go to a sporting events, for example, that, and then I go to look into the trash container, which has 2 divisions, one for recycling and one for trash. And I realize that that's just the lid, because below it, it's all mixed together.
Yeah.
And so we all know that that's not getting recycled. So, and that, it's those types of things that I see. And I just think, what can we do? Even at our school level, I was a high school teacher for marine biology for about 5 years in the early 2000s. And every teacher had a recycling bin in their class. I would sit back, at the end of the day, I'm grading papers, and the custodian would walk in, and I would watch the custodian take it and just throw it right in the, and we'd have newspapers and lots of plastic bottles at the time. Hopefully that's still not the case. Throw it right into the trash. And so I would talk to them. So eventually they just told me, we can't afford, we don't have the budget for recycling. We don't have recycling. So what can we do? So we formed an ecology club, and we went out and we recycled at least all the newspapers in that school.
Yeah.
So there are lots of things that we can do, at the school level, at that elementary level, middle school, high school level, institutionally, that I think can make a big wave of change. And I saw a really cool program one time when we have kids that come to our field trips all the time. There's one today, and when they come, they bring. There's actually a policy, if I recall, where the kids have to put their lunches into a 1-gallon Ziploc bag and then take a Sharpie and put their name on it, right? So that's for practicality purposes, so the teachers can keep it organized and everything else. Well, imagine every field trip that we get, we'll have about 2 pretty large trash containers, all of Ziploc bags and all the other plastics that the kids use. That's a challenge for us. So we're working on creating an opportunity and a challenge for the schools. We're working on some funding for this program where we can actually, when you come, we're going to teach you what is compostable, what is recyclable, and what is waste, or landfill, we have to call it, so they can get a sense of what that means by waste. And then we're going to have a challenge to see who can have the least amount of waste, you know, in each of these programs when you come here, and just being mindful.
And it is so important. I have a friend who recently went on a field trip with her kids to the Orange County landfill, and she was stunned by just seeing the huge amount of trash that is brought there every single day. And she said, you know, it made a difference in her life, and they're going to do their best to try and reduce their waste. So you've been with the Marine Discovery Center for 15 years. You've seen a lot of changes over those 15 years. Where do you see the Indian River Lagoon and our coastline 15 years from now?
Yeah, ultimately, you know, one of our goals is community, building community, and we do that through, in our case, a sense of ownership of the Indian River Lagoon. And we're beginning to see that shift in our community of how important that waterway is. And I like to feel like we've been a part of that shift. You know, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of great folks in our community at different levels that are also a part of it. But so in 15 years, I'd really like to think that when people come to New Smyrna Beach, it's not just about the beach. It's about the waterways, the lifestyle, which I do think people come, you know, for that as well. But the ethos of realizing how special this system is and wanting to protect it. So feel a personal responsibility whether they live there or they're visiting there.
Great. Chad Truxell with the Marine Discovery Center, thank you so much for joining us on Florida Foodie, and hopefully one day we'll see less straws and single-use plastic on our local beaches.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Florida Foodie. We would also like to thank our guest, Chad Truxell from the Marine Discovery Center in New Smyrna Beach. Check out the center's website, marinediscoverycenter.org. A special thanks to Clay Lepard for guest hosting. Follow him online at facebook.com/ClayLepardTV. And be sure to follow Lisa Bell as well. Search Lisa Bell News on Facebook and Instagram, or Lisa Bell News 6 on Twitter. You can find her new children's book online as well. Search NormanGnomeBooks.com or Norman Gnome Books on Facebook and Instagram. Also, a big thank you to our technical producers Derek Mosier and Ryan Hawley. I'm the show's producer Thomas Mates. You can find videos of all of our podcasts on clickorlando.com/podcast. Please share those on social media. That really helps us out. And be sure to check out our other podcast, Florida's Fourth Estate, hosted by Matt Austin and Ginger Gadsden.